Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Super Tees video. And in this one, I've got my top 10 arena comps Marksmanship Hunter edition. Marksmanship Hunter is a top performer when it comes to raids, Mythic Plus, and PvP, just all around looking like a phenomenal specialization. Recently receiving some quality of life buffs to its True Shot cooldown, so you're going to be doing even more damage. And with Shadowlands coming close to release, seeing things like this that are enhancing the overall amount of pressure that this class can do, it's looking like one that isn't going to be going anywhere, and it's really hit the mark in Shadowlands. So let's get started on what I'm going to be considering are the top 10 arena comps. If you're interested in jumping into 3v3 to go after some of these amazing looking gladiator mounts, I mean, these are comparable to the Wrath of the Lich King Frostworms in my mind, and they're going to advance season after season, maybe get some really cool color variants moving forward. So there are a lot of illustrious rewards to go after. This is a spec that I think can deliver. Let's review some comps. Moving in at number 10, we've got the Death Knight Hunter. This is a classic. The last time we really saw this composition flourish was in Cataclysm when it won BlizzCon. However, this variant is not going to have a Holy Paladin. In my mind, Holy Paladin is struggling to really have a place in many comps. I think it's likely to play with a mage, but let's just focus in on the Hunter. Now, this is a composition that I think, rather than focusing on crowd control, it's going to just focus on pressure. Death Knights running the Necrolord Covenants will have Abomination's Limb, which allows them to pull targets more frequently out into the open. You could run with this with a Frost or Unholy variant, depending on what your strategy would be. If you have a Druid healer, I would recommend Unholy, as your games are likely to be longer. If you're running a Frost Death Knight, then something like a Shaman or a Discipline Priest for extra damage and purge potential. But the main synergy of this is that the Death Knight can pull targets out into the open and pin them out in the open, and then the Hunter can just freely cast damage at them. If targets try and retreat away from the pressure, you have Resonating Arrow from the Kyrian Covenant, which is likely going to be your lock-in at this point for Marksmanship Hunter, where you can shoot through walls. So while your Death Knight's chasing them down, you can back them up. It's going to be a lot of pressure. I think it does run the risk of being a bit fragile, as it doesn't have a lot of stuns available to it, and it doesn't have a lot of hybrid healing, and at the moment hybrid healing is very strong, which is why it sounds really good right now as I'm describing it. I think with the way the meta is shaping up that it could struggle, but it could be a fun comp nonetheless, making the top 10. Coming in at number 9, we got Elemental Shaman, very similar to the Death Knight in this regard, where if any targets are out in the open, you're really going to lay waste and kind of blast them to pieces. Again, some downsides of this. This is a comp where I think you could squeeze in a Holy Paladin. I haven't recommended it because I wouldn't really recommend a Paladin in any case. But if you were maybe potentially bringing in a Holy Paladin for this composition, and again, the main advantage is Hunters are a bit of a glass cannon. So are Elemental Shamans, and the enemy has to pick a target, right? So are they going to attack the Hunter and leave the Elemental free casting? Are they going to attack the Elemental and leave the Hunter free casting? And then either role can go for crowd control on the healer, whether it be Hex or Freezing Trap. And when that crowd control is landed, they can back it up with huge burst damage between these specializations. Elemental Shaman brings in some hybrid healing, which is going to be important moving forward, but not as much. It did get nerfed, which is why it's only coming in at number 9. But Marksmanship Hunter is a spec that, in my mind, is going to work well with melee and ranged DPS, mostly because of that Kyrian Covenant, the Resonating Arrow to shoot through pillars when targets run away from you, or potentially for just bonus damage out in the middle of the map. But I think it is going to be more important for retreat, especially if Warlocks are prevalent with their Demonic Circle baseline. They'll be able to portal behind pillars and escape. You'll be able to cut off their escape. Coming in at number 8, we're going to get the Boomkin actually here. Which is a little bit surprising. I don't put Boomkin on a lot of lists, but maybe it is rising up in its overall power, getting just kind of an overall buff in a recent patch change. It still struggles a bit in terms of the hybrids. It's really good at keeping itself alive, not so good at keeping other targets alive. But the main reason I think it is stronger than that of the Elemental Shaman, which is a very similar role, is that you have more instant crowd control. You just have longer crowd control with Cyclone and Mass Entanglement Root Beam. There are potential strategies of running Deep Roots as an honor talent, which makes it so your roots take more damage to break. So you can attack targets that are rooted and they can't run. This could be a really good strat with a hunter to just root targets out in the open and go at them, or potentially to swap to healers that are sitting on the pillar and being annoying. You can also work with mass entanglement now as deep roots to pin the healer in a silence for 8 seconds and then stun them out with right afterwards and just pump a ton of damage. Double glass cannon situation again, where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, depending on which target you want to go after. Leave a boomkin open, they're cycloning. Leave a hunter open, you're probably dying. And it brings in more crowd control than the elemental, but I would say its damage is either equal, if not a little bit less. So this is more control based rather than just raw pressure based, like a lot of the other comps that I've been recommending so far for hunter. If this piques your interest, playing with a Birdman, I didn't mean to do that. We'll leave it alone. All right, coming in at number 7, we're going to be looking at the Windwalker Monk. Now, this is a melee DPS that's looking strong, but mostly because of Covenant abilities. The Venthyr one in particular, the Fallen Order, to be able to just summon in a lot of images. Windwalker has good synergy with ranged classes that have to be a priority target where melee DPS will stack. So that's why Windwalker has worked well with Destruction Warlock in the past, is when Warriors and Death Knights attack the Destruction Warlock because they don't want to get Chaos Bolted. The Windwalker can support them very well with Fist of Fury and Leg Sweep and Ring of Peace. And then when the enemies try and run away from that caster, the Windwalker is great at punishing them on the pillar. Marksmanship Hunter is going to be functioning very similar to a Destruction Warlock for this reason. So I think that the Windwalker will provide a lot of support to the Hunter. Its hybrid healing, though, as the Windwalker is much lower than that of some other hybrids, which is why it's only coming in at the number 7 slot. But this is the main reason I think that this composition could work. If you were limited in your options and or curious to try and play with a Windwalker, this is definitely going to be a fun composition. But in terms of its overall power, let's keep the train going. Coming in at number 6 is going to be the Warlock. Very similar, double glass cannon. Leave the Warlock open. They were going to be free casting dots on the entire team, and they have spam fear for the enemy healer, and most importantly, Malefic Rapture, and potentially playing Death Bolt in this composition. So when the Hunter lands a freezing trap, the Warlock can launch out a Death Bolt as Affliction. I wouldn't really recommend this as any other spec than Affliction at the moment, possibly Destruction, but I've only listed Affliction at this point because I think it would be your best option. Affliction Warlock is in a place where its main purpose is to just keep damage over time effects up and run for its life. So if you're a hunter who's new to Hunter, everybody's going to attack your Warlock. And then you get all the time in the world to be like, hey, I'm going to go trap something. I'm going to figure out how this game works. This is going to be a good newbie Hunter composition in my mind. More of the pressure will be on the Warlock. The Warlock will have to play really well because unlike a lot of other classes that a Warlock could play with, the Hunter is really only offering damage as a support, which, let's be honest, it's got a lot of. So if this is a really fun comp, the last time this comp was good was like Missive Pandaria, is the last time I really remember seeing it, but it doesn't have Wyvern Sting, so it's missing some instant crowd control that made it so good in the past, but it could just come back alive with raw pressure alone. Disc Priest still the best healer at the moment, which is why it's recommended on all of my comps, but you could make this work with a Druid or a Shaman. Shaman Priest more offense, Druid more defense. Moving forward into the number 5 slot, the Shadow Priest, much similarly to the Affliction Warlock, however, basically the souped up version of it. This is a composition that has more instant crowd control than that of the Affliction Warlock, with Psychic Horror and Silence and Mind Bomb specifically coming from the Shadow Priest. You can lock the healer down for 20 plus seconds. And you get insane burst damage. And it's another situation where you got double glass cannon. Do you go after the Shadow Priest or do you go after the Hunter? This is a very aggressive setup-based composition, and I think that it will be a lot of fun to play. That's why it comes in at number 5. You can't really go wrong. I feel like most things are going to work with the Shadow Priest. Recommend it with a Druid for defense or a Shaman for offense. Probably want a Shaman more often than not, as Cyclone's going to be diminishing return on Mind Bomb, and it is difficult for Resto Druids to utilize Cyclone at the moment. Coming in at number 4, we're going to be looking at the Feral, the Jungle. And guess what? It's not number 1. Are you surprised to see that? I bet you're a little bit surprised to see that. Jungle Cleave is not my number 1 recommended, but it is top 4. For the same reason as always, just stun into trap. Ferals provide a lot of stuns. They also provide a lot of hybrid healing, which synergizes well with discipline priests to enable them to focus on doing damage rather than spamming shadow mend. And it's just a synergy, a match made in heaven, really. Discipline priests with these hybrids and with lots of stuns for the hunter to get support. And ferals can now have cyclone baseline. So if the hunter is getting trained, the feral can assist you with cyclones, whether it be on the healer or on the damage dealers attacking you. So this is a composition that's going to have a lot of support. It's just overall still a really good composition. Coming in at number 3, we're going to be looking at the Warrior. And this is one that is on my class recommendation list. If you want to check it out, I'll have a link to it at the end of the video. In PvP specifically, I understand in PvE, Arms Warrior not looking too hot, but in PvP, it is looking like a top dog at the moment. It just has all of its utility returned with an insane amount of defense potential, Stormbolt, Intervene, Overwatch, to honor talents for reflecting your allies. This is a class that's going to protect the hunter more than the Windwalker, right? As we recommended earlier, the Windwalker composition. This is basically the same idea, but I think the Warrior is more consistent and reliable. And, you know, if you're going to be getting into a marriage with a team and going after some titles for a long period of time, you probably want consistent and reliable. You know, it's going to be important for those long runs, which is why Warrior comes in at number 3 for myself personally, but it is still lacking the hybrid role. I think it makes it up in terms of pressure and being able to apply mortal wounds with sharpened blade and provide Stormbolt for the hunter to land freezing traps out of, which is again an important synergy to have. It may be a little bit volatile to run this with a discipline priest, but that is assuming discipline priest gets lowered in its current power. Otherwise, I would have to say play priest. Shaman, druid, great substitutes as well. Also, you have a Kyrian warrior with Spear of Bastion. You can pin targets out in the open for the hunter. Then when they've got blown up and they try and run to the pillar, resonating arrow at the pillar, we don't care that you're trying to run. I can see through walls. So good synergies there with Covenants as well. Coming in at number 2, the Ret Hunter. This has been a staple composition, although fell off for all of Battle for Azeroth pretty much. It's nice to see it come back, although I think it is coming back for reasons that Retribution Paladin is likely to have all the sights on them for nerfs. So a bit worried about it, but at the moment, because the expansion is so close and we haven't seen any significant changes to Ret at this point, there's no doubt in my mind that it's going to come in as a strong contender. You have the hybrid healing of the Feral, but really massively higher with Word of Glory, just insane healing from it. It's going to enable the Discipline Priest to pump out a ton of damage. This is definitely one where, while I have Shaman and Druid as options, Priest is going to be the heavily favored healer for this. Even if it were to get nerfed or other healers were to get buffed, it's just too good of a synergy. Again, that match made in Heaven, Hybrid, and Discipline Priest to get healing from the DPS and damage from the healer. And then in particular, Retribution Paladin is just going to have huge burst damage. Stun, Trap, Avenging Wrath. Pretty simple formula, right? So if you're looking for a composition that can get you to that Gladiator rating, I think that this one is one of the most straightforward ones. I haven't ranked it as number 1. We'll get to that in a moment. But I think this comp is easier to play than the number 1. So if you're a new player, I would recommend this more than when we get to the number 1 slots. But overall, in terms of its maximum potential, I think that there's another composition that's a little bit more sneaky than the Retribution Paladin. And let's take a look at it. Coming in at the number 1 for the top 10 Marksmanship Hunter Arena compositions in Shadowlands. Who would have thought that it's a subtlety rogue? This is a spec that I don't know how it keeps dodging the nerfs. I guess it's popped evasion to the developers, because I was expecting it to get nerfed in this most recent beta build, but it didn't. It's a spec that is owning single target in PvE. It's a top contender in Mythic Plus. It's an overall amazing spec for the entire game. And the reason I wasn't really recommending it is because, like, there's no way this doesn't get nerfed, right? All right, there's no way this doesn't get nerfed. It's still permanent evasion, I guess, to dodge those nerfs. But in this composition specifically, if you execute on this, you're going to have setups that are going to be absolutely unstoppable. And one of the sneaky synergies between these classes is that Hunter's Mark, which is returning to the game, it allows you to see stealth targets when applied to a target, allows you to see a target while it is shadowy dueled. So if you don't know what shadowy duel is, the rogue, a subtlety rogue, can activate it. And normally the rogue and whoever he's activated it on can only see each other. But if you hunters mark that target before Shadowy Duel, the hunter can also see it. So you get a 2 versus 1 for 6 seconds on top of a crowd control chain that is going to be massive. Kidney shot and a freezing trap, and you still have stuns for the kill targets. This is going to be insane burst damage. It's easily one of my top recommended compositions at the moment, but it will require a little more finesse, I think, in my mind, than the Ret Paladin or the Warrior version. So unless you're really looking for a challenge, trying to push the peak of your performance, I would recommend the Ret Paladin for beginners coming into Arena, but you really can't go wrong with Subtlety Rogue at the moment. It's just too much synergy, too much damage built into this composition specifically. So I hope you enjoyed this list. Thank you very much for watching. If you did and you enjoyed this type of Shadowlands content, you want to keep up on the know-how of what's happening, because oh my God, there's a lot happening, changes just every single week pretty much, and I'm trying my best to stay on top of it, get that information uploaded to you here. So if you subscribe, it will notify you when that information is available, and I can give you my opinion on it, my thoughts moving forward, if you should make any changes. I'm going to be updating some of my tier lists that are kind of on the months old end based on more testing and more changes that have been applied to. So if you really want to see where your classes are ranking up, this is going to be a good resource for you. Leave comments down below with some compositions that you thought up potentially for the Marksmanship Hunter, or any compositions that you want my opinion on. I love reading the comments down below and seeing what you have to say and doing my best to answer them as I can. So thank you once again very much for watching. Check out my other videos. I'll have them linked up above here, and I will see you in the next video.